been a busy guy at this conference. You've made a number of presentations, so we're hoping to touch on a few issues. One of the programs that you participated in focused on the need for libraries to embrace alternate avenues of discovery. What does that mean exactly?
It's a good question, because I don't think we had any, we didn't actually have any firm answers. I think we were asking a lot of questions, but the idea is that you know, our users are starting with Google. They're starting with Google Scholar. They are unfortunately starting with things like Sci-Hub sometimes. They are maybe starting with discovery services, but even when they're starting with discovery services, they are not necessarily getting at all the library content that we want them to. So the idea behind the panel was to think about whether there are ways to sort of expand what we were thinking about as the discovery ecosystem, right? That we want people to use Google because that's where they're starting, but when they use it, we want them to get to library content or at least scholarly content. When they use a discovery service, we want them to get to high quality content. When they use a discovery service, we want them to have a good experience and come back. And I think so. I think the idea behind that panel and where we ended up is we need to make each of these things better, right? We need to make the experience of searching Google or Google Scholar work better for a user who wants to get to library content, so that they find the resources we're providing. We want somebody who starts in Google to end up in library content and not go back to Google and start again, so a seamless process. But we also want somebody who wants to use a specialized tool to be able to do that in a meaningful way as well. So I think the really alternative avenues of discovery means embracing all of those things and recognizing that our users are, whether we want them to or not, going to be using things like Google and Google Scholar, and making those work as best as possible.
So, and one of the key things that we're looking at is making sure they get the quality material. That's what I'm hearing.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, building on that, Michael, how can the librarians enhance their discovery services to compete with other tools, while at the same time exploring the potential of these tools to give the user the broadest range of discovery?
I think so. One way of thinking about enhancing the tools is recognizing that we've created these discovery tools to compete with Google. They're not competing with Google. And maybe backing off from that a bit, right? So we certainly want the student who comes to Primo or EDS or Summon to do a search and find journal articles and find books. Right? That's great, and when it works, but we also want those to work for the student who maybe wants to do something a little bit more sophisticated but doesn't quite know where to begin, right? So we don't they don't know where to go for a subject-specific database because they don't know what that subject-specific database is, but if they start with the discovery service and find have better options for finding content they need. And so that's one way of thinking, but another way of thinking of enhancing discovery services is, I always use the example of primary source content, right? So these great packages of content we have from Redex and Adam Matthew and so on, that stuff gets buried, as it probably should, in the discovery systems as they are now, but it would be great if there were sort of context-aware searching that showed that somebody wanted to find primary source content versus secondary source content, and then pulled all that together, or maybe that allowed them to sort of limit the search just to primary source content, but in a really meaningful way. So I think those are some ways. Those are some ways to think about it.
Okay.
Is there a role for publishers and database providers in improving this situation and enhancing the scenario?
Yeah, I think there's a role for all of us. I mean, publishers. And going back to the general sort of discovery ecosystem idea, beyond the discovery system, or the discovery service. One idea is that really publishers should be. We know that most referrals to publisher content come from Google and Google Scholar. Wouldn't it be cool if the publishers worked either with another service or with each other to make it so that when somebody ends up on the publisher content, they get to the library content, which then sends them back to a different publisher's content, and so on, right? So that there's a seamless process, a landing page of some sort, right? And whether that's provided by a third party or by a publisher, it doesn't really matter to me. And the other thing that I think publishers could help us with is if you, for instance, did a search of Google, ended up on a page for a book title, an ebook title, it then somehow sent you to the library catalog where you discover we have the print title. So I think there are ways that in an ideal world they would all link together.
It sounds like you're talking about integration of some
Yeah,
sort.
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, you recently participated in a session that discussed the recent study focusing on the expanding availability of journal articles in various open access forums.
Yeah.
What findings did you and the rest of the panels share with the audience? And I have one other little question. What about the issue of the article of record?
Sure, yeah. So I'm really excited about that study. This is something I'm doing with John McDonald from USC and Jason Price from Skelk, and we've done a number of things around discovery over the years. And this one, it's not about open access content; it's about freely available, right? So from a user perspective, they don't care. They probably don't even know, and yet they should care, and they should know, or maybe they don't need to know, but they certainly need to care. We were looking at the availability of open access content via Google and Google Scholar,
Right.
the availability of rogue content through ResearchGate and academia.edu, where it's archived by the author. We know from a lot of reports from publishers that a lot of the articles in ResearchGate and academia.edu are not versions that should be shared, and so that's why we're referring to that as rogue. And then we looked at Sci-Hub as well, which we were referring to as pirated because Sci-Hub it's pirated. A couple of results. One, around 55% of the articles that we looked for were available in an open access or rogue version. Through Google Scholar or ResearchGate. 87% of the articles we looked for were available in Sci-Hub, which is pretty shocking,
Yes, it is.
right?
Wow.
So whether we want to deal with Sci-Hub or not, we have to. It is, and by deal with it, I don't mean embrace it, actually, but I mean it's something we have to face. Some other things that were related to Sci-Hub, there was a survey of 11,000 researchers in science earlier this year. 88% of them said they don't care whether it's pirated or not. Right? They're willing to download pirated content.
Wow.
About 40% of respondents to that survey said that the reason that they use Sci-Hub is either because it's more convenient than the library. That's 17% of them, I think. And then 23% said because basically they want to stick it to the publisher, right? Which isn't quite what the phrasing was, but essentially, we don't like the profits of publishers, so that's why we're going to do this. So what I read into that is that, and then 50% said because they don't have access to the article otherwise. But that 40% is essentially saying, I do have access to the article and I'm choosing to use Sci-Hub. And that should be disturbing to us too. So what do we do about that? I don't know, but
You mentioned, that some of this was the usability is a lot easier with these pirated
That's
articles.
Right. That's right.
And that's something that publishers have to address.
That's absolutely, and publishers and libraries and our discovery vendors, right? So some of it is as basic as we make people click 2 or 3 times to get to it, and you only have to click once in Sci-Hub. Some of it is the fact that we are forcing people to authenticate, and we're forcing them to authenticate because we're paying lots of money and we have licenses and so on. And that's something that we're doing in conjunction with publishers and discovery vendors. And we need to figure out how to make that whole process easier.
And the whole copying limitations
Yeah,
too.
that's right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and so some of it is recognizing that there's a need of some sort in the current system to have a some kind of firewall, some kind of authentication process, but making that process as easy as most other things on the web, where you sign in and then you're in, right? If you could sign in once and get to all articles with one click, that would probably solve some of the Sci-Hub problem. So it's a scary issue, interesting issue, and probably one that is going to force a lot of change on all of us.
It sounds like breaking down barriers to access is one of the things that librarians could do.
Right.
But if you think in terms of the overall open access as a ecosystem for open access and freely available materials,
Right.
what else can librarians do to make this work more efficiently and better?
It's a good question. I think one way to make it better, or one thing we can do is educate users. That's probably a relatively small thing that we can do that has a relatively small impact. I think figuring out how to make the legitimate freely available content as readily available as possible. A lot of it's available through Google and Google Scholar. My assumption, we did a little bit of preliminary testing of this, but we didn't do enough. But our assumption is that it's not actually as available through our discovery systems as it should be. So just for example, if you're using the link resolver or your knowledge base, if you set up your knowledge base, you don't subscribe to a journal, you tell your knowledge base you don't subscribe to that journal. User comes into the discovery system, it's a hybrid journal. There are open access to articles in that journal, but they're all unavailable because we've configured our system to not recognize that journal actually has some open access articles. So article level versus journal level in the knowledge base would solve that small problem. But I think sort of, a lot of what I was involved in at this conference was asking questions and I think pointing out that there were some issues and not necessarily having answers.
The solutions.
And this is one where I don't know that I have a solution.
Well, we're probably at that stage where that's where we are. We're trying to figure it out.
Exactly.
And it's more than just librarians and libraries, it's publishers, it's database providers, it's all of us have to work together to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, definitely.